So let's say a student has a score of 32. Now, this student might have made just 6 mistakes out of 75 in English, 6 mistakes out of 60 in math, 3 mistakes out of 40 in reading, and 3 mistakes out of 40 in science. That means a total of 18 mistakes out of 215 questions in all. So that is the score here, 18 mistakes out of 215. How does that manifest in terms of understanding what this score really means in terms of score improvements? How much improvement is necessary? That means this particular student who has made 18 mistakes only out of 215 has a 20% conceptual gap in understanding the content. Now, how did that happen? That's a long story. Students are taught everything they need to know in high school. I agree with that. However, they have been taught the content quite long ago, first of all. And secondly, they might have missed out a few things that are tested on the test. Finally, the way the questions are put for this competitive test, it is different from the way they're tested in high school or middle school. So that is why there's a conceptual gap for such very brilliant students who get a 32. Now, you might ask me, so a student has a score of 32, right? And has a 20% gap. How are we going to cover this gap? And that is what I'm going to discuss in detail in the next slide. Now, let's first understand the gaps. So a score of 32 means a 20% gap in conceptual understanding. A score of 30 means the student has made about 28, this is a ballpark, 28 mistakes out of 215, and there is a conceptual gap in understanding of 30%, almost 1/3 of the content is missing from the student's understanding. Now let's come down to a score of 26, which is an average score, which is a fairly good score. That means 40 mistakes out of 215, and that means a 40% gap in understanding of concepts. A score of 18, which is quite a common score, then that means 105 mistakes out of 215. And that leads us to a conceptual gap of 60%. And you'll be surprised, does this happen? It happens very often. So what does that mean? 60%, that means the student knows only about 1/3 of the concepts, or has retained only about 1/3 of the concepts. So that is what what understanding the scores really means. What do scores really present to us when students come to us and say, hey, I got an 80. It tells me the student needs to work really hard. 60% of concepts are missing. If a student comes at 32, I said, okay, it's just 20% conceptual gap. So this is a very important understanding. So now I'm going to elaborate further on this. So then the point is,